Hello, welcome to another episode of Leading with Pride in partnership with Fairer Consulting. I'm Dan Robertson and I'm the Global MD of Fairer Consulting. I'm super delighted to be here with Jack Guest. Jack is the Global Inclusion Advisor for HSBC. Jack, good to see you.
Hi Dan, thanks for bringing me on.
No, more than welcome actually. Thanks for sparing the time and stuff like that. So lots to talk about this afternoon, lots of questions for you and the rest of it. But why don't we just start with Jack? Who is Jack? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Jack is somebody who has had, I believe, quite an unexpected career path. I think that when I was, growing up, my parents identified that I was dyslexic quite early on, and that, in that time, set their expectations for my achievement moderate, I would probably say. And so for them to now find me working as a director in a global bank, I think is a big shock to most people, least of all myself.
Okay. And so you now have this quite a big role actually in D&I. Was it always your ambition to work in D&I, or give us a bit of a sense of how did you get into the role?
Yeah, so working for HSBC was one of the first jobs that I ever had. I was born and raised in the Midlands in Worcester, and I was looking for, straight out of college after doing science, I was looking for just a temporary summer job. And I landed a role which was a meter and greeter in my local branch of HSBC. And that is basically welcoming people to in and say, oh, did you want to pay in a check? Oh, well, I've got this machine for you here. And it was only supposed to be 6 months over summer. And the branch manager was like, this Jack, he's all right, let's see what we can do. And so I fell into banking by accident. I had no financial qualifications. My GCSE results for maths were not great. But it was being able to find myself in an environment where people accepted me for who I was very easily. I was fortunate to be able to come out as a gay man very early on in my career, and I believe that had a substantial impact into the way that I could present myself at work, how I could bring my full self and be, 100% Jack. And that made people stand up and notice me. And so for the first 6 years I was with HSBC in the UK, I did a variety of roles, frontline banking, mortgage advice, wealth advice, and thrived completely unexpectedly. And it was about 6-7 years into my career where I thought, okay, well, what is the next step? What do really successful people have? And a lot of them have international experience. And so I started very simply picking up the phone and speaking to English-sounding people working in foreign countries. And I spoke to about 6 or 7 different people, got a lot of advice, and one of them called me back and said, I might have a role for you, let's have a conversation. And then by the afternoon, I had been offered a job to fly out and move to Hong Kong with the bank and to give offshore wealth advice and mortgage advice there. It was in this relocation to Hong Kong where I really started to become aware of the massive cultural differences, not only within the working environment, but also in wider society. Being gay in Asia and Hong Kong back in 2011 was simply not discussed. It was taboo, I think is a pretty accurate word. It was really swept under the carpet. And I found myself in a position where I could be myself because I was a privileged expat. I didn't have family or society pressures. I was still able to be out. But I was hearing so many stories of colleagues and friends who didn't have that luxury, who didn't have that ability to be their true selves. And I was starting to hear all sorts of stories about people being seen with their partner by their manager at the weekend and then coming into work on Monday and saying, my career here is done. I've got to move. I've got to go to another bank because I'm never going to get a promotion now that they know that I'm gay. So it was learning about this cultural difference that made me join a small group of individuals and set up the first Pride chapter in Asia for HSBC, our LGBTQ employee resource group. And that is how I got into diversity and inclusion. And with many people who fall into diversity and inclusion accidentally, being part of an employee resource group And being part of that change just became a larger and larger part of my role until in 2014, I was asked to be the first diversity and inclusion practitioner for the bank in Asia. And it's all kind of gone uphill from there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's an amazing story, Jack, actually. Now you're back in London.
Yes.
And you're very senior and you're heading up and doing some wonderful things. Let's drill down then on it's Pride Month.
Yeah.
And so, we want to talk about that. And I guess one big question is, we've come so far, in terms of LGBT inclusion, both in terms of legal frameworks, but also, I guess, social attitudes. So let's just start with this idea of pride. What does pride mean to you, and what's its kind of relevance today in a complex world where in some ways social attitudes are great and legal frameworks are great, and yet we've still got work to do? So what does this whole thing mean to you?
For me, pride is making a noise, it's being seen, it's prompting discussions, it's challenging norms, it is making ourselves seen. Because LGBTQ, being of a sexual orientation minority or a gender identity minority, can be hidden attributes. You can choose not to disclose your sexuality with your employer, with your family, with your friends. You can choose not to hide who you really feel that you are. And pride gives us the opportunity to be visible, to show the world that we exist, and to make a noise and ask, not ask, demand that we are treated equally in society.
So it's that visualizing our presence, and as you say, just articulating that the inequalities or the inequities we used to experience, we're not going to tolerate those anymore.
Exactly.
So we've come so far. I mean, I remember growing up in 1980s UK as a gay kid, and there was nothing there. There was no legal frameworks. I mean, the idea of getting married was just impossible, and all of that. So all of that stuff is great, and we've got all of that. And social attitudes, have moved on. And organisations like HSBC are doing some great work. But I'm curious around, where next? So what are the things that we need to be aware of in terms of what's next on our kind of collective LGBT journey, if you like?
Yeah. We have, in many parts of the world, made great progress. I mean, just the experience that you will have seen in the United Kingdom throughout your life, I think, is some of the greatest progress we make. And we do still continue to see great progress. I mean, just in the news very recently, Thailand has now passed through the final house their marriage equality bill, right? So we know that there are many countries around the world that are making great progress. We also know that there are many countries around the world that are regressing. Name and shaming, Uganda recently introduced the death penalty for same-sex acts. And so when we have a look at the progress of pride and LGBTQ people, we have to look at it worldwide as a global community. And we need to maintain vigilance in markets like the UK and the US, where unfortunately we see a pendulum effect. We've made an incredible amount of progress. Now we are seeing that law of opposition, that fundamental change and resistance to change. And we also need to have a look at countries that still have a long way to go, and to not only be visible in our advocacy globally, but to use our economic influence to help illustrate the economic power of inclusion and indeed the cost of exclusion.
Right, okay, that makes sense. If you think about an organisation like HSBC, where you operate globally across multiple jurisdictions, and you've shared your experience of working in Hong Kong, and you've probably got a presence in places that are quite homophobic, right?
Absolutely.
How does an organisation like HSBC sort of navigate, your core values and your principles of trying to be inclusive for everyone, but then, I guess working in jurisdictions where, our identity would be, under threat effectively? How do you navigate that on a kind of just from a personal perspective, from an employee, what sort of advice, guidance do you give to the employee, and then maybe even the office managers over there?
It is very difficult, but if you stick to some principles, you will be able to continue progress and use your influence to shape the markets in which you operate. Some really good examples of this are visible corporate advocacy. I do believe is important, and so accusations of pinkwashing and just doing it for the credibility, I know, don't stick, because quite often when an organization changes their logo on LinkedIn or on social media or puts flags up in their lobby, this has been requested and asked for by LGBTQ people in that organization. And so using your global brand to illustrate your support of this community is exceptionally important. Another principle that we have to be comfortable with is that we are a business first and we are an advocate second. And in order to operate within these markets and use soft influence, we have to have a license to operate. And so in markets where our license could be threatened because of our advocacy, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, the UAE, we need to respect local laws and customs. And there will be markets that we can't be as loud and visible.
Sure.
But what we can do is lead by example at the global level. We can ensure that our senior leaders in those markets are provided with the talking points about the economic benefits of inclusion and are able to have comfortable closed-door discussions with senior influential leaders within these markets to explain how discrimination and exclusion is not good for business. And we also need to make sure that the support and the resources that we provide as an organization are accessible by individuals in hostile markets, and that they can reach out to support networks, resources, learning tools, without having firewalls.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that we've done quite well is ensure that our global ally learning and our support networks are available to anybody wherever they are. And indeed, I think a really important step is to make sure that any global learning that you have is in a variety of languages, including languages for regions that are hostile to LGBTQ people, so that we can help people learn.
That makes sense. Let's think about career tracks, okay? So we know, if you think about things like unconscious bias, there's certain types of bias which impact different groups. So in terms of gender, we've got things like, the double bind, there's the, motherhood penalty and all of that. So we know that, like, how women are structurally disadvantaged, in society and in the workplace. We know how kind of racial microaggressions play out and stuff like that. Some of those things don't necessarily apply from an LGBT perspective. We've got our own challenges and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to get your view on, what do you think are the unique challenges that individuals might face today, currently? And what sort of mechanisms do you put in place, whether it's the kind of sponsorship, the mentoring, or what things can we do to really help colleagues become more confident in who they are and push their careers forward, particularly in a workplace context?
LGBTQ people have to come out almost daily. It's not a case of just coming out once. And so when we talked earlier about sexual orientation and gender identity being potentially invisible, one of the experiences that our community faces is having to correct people on assuming that we might have an opposite sex partner, or thinking carefully before we share that we spent the weekend with our husband or a same-sex partner as well, because we're not sure how that other person may react. And microaggressions for LGBTQ people absolutely do exist, right? It's not only assumptions, but it's misgendering, it's dead naming, it's all sorts of things. I spoke about my experience and the privilege that I was able to have coming out at a very early age. I was fortunate that my family were really, really loving and accepting, and that my workplace was as well. But if you are able to, I would take control of the narrative about you and live openly if you can, and if that's safe for you to do so, because then you are in control of your own narrative, and you are in control of how people perceive you, and it puts you in a position of ownership. I am very conscious that not everybody has that opportunity though, and so it is becoming comfortable with yourself first of all, and then when the time is right and for people whom you trust, then you may choose to do that.
And then it might go into a conversation about allyship, because I think some people can be more privileged, if you like, to live their authentic lives. And if we take that intersectionality perspective, if you're from a certain community, you've had different forms of oppression, and so you might not be yourself.
Absolutely.
So that leads in this idea of, maybe we need to be that voice for colleagues that can't be that voice. And so, what does being an LGBT ally, what does it mean to you, to either have you had one, or what does it mean for you now to step into that role of being an ally, for other colleagues, if you like?
Well, the first thing that I would say to anybody who is watching this who identifies as LGBT is that you need to be an ally for those other members of our LGBTQ community as well. Just because you're part of the community yourself doesn't mean that you can exclude the others. We've got to stick together. For allies for our straight allies, right, we love you, but I cannot overemphasize the importance, because it is only through allyship that we were able to establish a Pride Employee Resource Group chapter. It is only through allyship that we were able to work with policy owners and indeed product owners to change the way that we support not only our colleagues who, with same-sex partners, but also how we support our customers, and changing the products and the services and the journeys of our customers to be more inclusive. LGBTQ people, approximately 10% of the workforce, maybe increasing, couldn't do that without allyship.
Right.
And so allies listening and learning about our experiences and then applying that to the way that they work and the way that they do business is what brings us greater inclusion.
Okay, so we've got, and it reminds me, so I did study philosophy at university, and it reminds me of this concept called alliance politics. There's this great lesbian philosopher, black philosopher called Bell Hooks. And she talks about if we want change to happen, like different communities need to come together, and collectively we have that power, to make it happen and stuff like that. And that's kind of really what you're articulating around having those street allies and the rest of it. Yeah.
Yes, and we as a community are hugely fortunate to have some incredible allies, people who truly love us and want us to be able to be ourselves no matter where we are in the world. What also gives me great comfort, not only during Pride Month, but the rest of the year, is that actually the majority are on our side, right? So in the UK, the US, and indeed even many, many other markets, in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong community now majoritively supports same-sex partnerships, right in the heart of Asia. And so we as a community need to help the quieter allies find their voice as well.
And to be comfortable with that. So just a couple more questions for you, Jack. One is, allyship goes into this idea of kind of inclusive leadership. And I think, organizations like HSBC have been doing some great work. So I suppose my next question is, where next from an organizational perspective? So what is it that businesses either are not doing that they could do, or what else could they ramp up in order to just keep the positive pressure on? So that's my first question, and I'll ask the second one as well. And the second one is, where next for you in terms of your career journeys? You've got a great job now and all of that, but where do you see your career going and the rest of it? So first thing about the organisation, and then your next career move.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true that we have seen a level of corporate advocacy around Pride and LGBTQ that is just never before seen. But I also know that we are in a very sensitive environment globally. We are in a huge election cycle, We have the UK, the US elections, we have many others around the world, and unfortunately, members of the LGBTQ community are at target. We see a lot of rhetoric around trans people in our communities, and so naturally, this causes a lot of big corporate advocates to just have a moment and sense, okay, well, what are the risks involved in corporate advocacy? What I would say is hold your nerve, stick to your principles, and maintain doing the right thing for the communities in which you operate. And the LGBTQ community is a really important stakeholder group for almost every large organisation around the world. I would also say to big organisations, if you are not at the stage where you are waving a flag and making a very visible show of inclusion, then just get the basics right. Have a look at your policies, have a look at things that aren't equalised or perhaps aren't accessible for LGBTQ people, and then make sure that you communicate that to your colleagues as well. Make sure that you share that you've made these changes and that you recognise and understand them as individuals and that you value that they are part of your workforce. And you don't have to make a big song and dance about it externally if you're not there.
Sure.
But at least speak to your colleagues, LGBTQ colleagues, internally during this moment.
Amazing. So we can step up there. And then, yeah, the final question, Jack, is I'm not advocating you leave HSBC, but in terms of, you've been in this space for quite a long time, actually. Yeah. And in terms of your own personal journey, what would you like to be doing, as in not necessarily a job, but the kind of things you'd like to be working on in, 3-5 years' time, etc.?
Working for HSBC, I've been with HSBC now for 18 years. I started when I was 19, all right? And the reason that I have been able to stay with this organisation for so long is because by being able to be myself and to build my own personal brand and ask questions and just bring my full self to work, I truly believe that I've been able to do a whole variety of different roles and take opportunities that sometimes are only available in an organisation the scale of HSBC, right? And so for as long as HSBC continues to give me the opportunity to grow and develop, I'm around. However, I'm also fully aware that it is important to continue your own personal development and growth, and there may absolutely be a point where I leave amicably and I have a look at what is next for me. And you know what? I don't know what is next for me, but throughout my life, a lot of people have said, oh, well, what's your 3-year plan? What's your 5-year plan? I've never really had a plan. What I have done is been able to recognize opportunity and take it in the moment. And so I will continue to live by that.
Jack, always a pleasure. Hopefully we'll see you on another podcast at some time in the future.
Thanks, Dan. I'm so grateful to be here.
No worries. And thank you all for watching the latest podcast. We've got many more. Please have a look at our social media channels. There's various ones out there. And we look forward to seeing you at the next episode. For more information, please have a look at the Hayes UK website, the Hayes Island website, or the Fairer Consulting website, where you'll find lots of more useful information. Thank you all so much.